Let's be honest. We all know what we should be doing. Whether we want to drop a few kilos, be more productive, or improve the quality of our sleep, knowing what to do isn't the hard part. The hard part is actually doing it and sticking with it. Do you want to know why? I'll tell you. My name is Shireen Skippers, and I'm host and founder of For Your Life. For Your Life is a podcast all about habits. Join me as I talk to experts from all walks of life as we discover the power of habit and how you could use it to change your life. So if you want to change your life, change your habits. Habits are about time, and your time starts now. As you know, For Your Life is all about the power of habit. And after being in this field for a very long time, I've come to realize that not all habits are equal. And what I mean is that some habits are more powerful than others, especially when it comes to changing your life. In my opinion, one of the most powerful habits of all is the habit of sleep. How you sleep, when you sleep, and of course the quality of your sleep can dramatically improve many other areas of your life. It's the domino effect. To find out more, I tracked down an absolute expert in this space. Chris Bunny is a sleep scientist and the founder of an at-home sleep study practice called Home Sleep. He has more than 25 years' experience in analyzing sleep data and sleep disturbances. In this episode, I talked to Chris about all things sleep-related and what you can do to literally sleep your way to a better you. Welcome, Chris. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself and how you started Home Sleep.
Sure. Well, thanks, Shireen. But first of all, I want to say thank you, and it's a privilege for me to be here in front of you. You're doing some amazing work with this Habits podcast, and the previous interviews you've done are just amazing.
Thank you.
It's a privilege for me to be here.
My first fan. Thank you.
Yes. Well, look, basically where it all started with me was my passionate interest in optimising human performance in the sports science world. Since I first read about the Australian Institute of Sport in the library in year 10, that's what I wanted to do. That was my passion and focus for my whole studies and my life. So I ended up working at the Institute of Sport in Canberra for a year and as my work experience year at university, because I studied physics, physiology, electronics, and then did 4 years postgrad research on muscle fatigue at university in postgrad research towards a PhD, which I never finished unfortunately. But the skills I learnt from that research was just invaluable to starting up a career in sleep science, which was my first job out of university. And I didn't realise it at the time, but it was exactly all those same skills for sports science, but in sleep science. So I just had to learn all about sleep disorders. So it was in the 90s when they were just starting to open up sleep laboratories in Australia. And they were just craving for people with my sort of skills who were basically people who were experts in monitoring people's physiology.
Mm-hmm. Great. And from there, you were asked to speak at a dental conference or something.
That was a few years down the track.
And then tell me about that.
Yes. In 2006, I was asked to give a talk at a dental conference on the Gold Coast, and that conference was all about the link between teeth grinding and sleep.
That's fascinating.
And at that time, I had no idea, and I just thought, yeah, sure. I didn't really believe them. But because I was really good at sleep and measuring people's sleep, I thought, okay, I'll work with these people. And after that talk, I had 12 dentists plead with me. They lined up and they literally pleaded with me to start up a home sleep study service of the highest quality to help their patients. So I thought, okay, done. And within 2 months, I registered my business name and started up the business.
Wonderful. So you have, I think, over 25 years in the space, and I loved you talking about your mission is to help people improve the quality of their life through improving the quality of their sleep, and that's exactly why I tracked you down, and that's exactly why you're here today. So you and I met about a week ago, and as much as we'd love everyone to think that we're just kind of walked in and just sat down and talking about this, we did actually plan what we were going to say because it's such a big, broad topic. And we both agreed that we didn't want to tell people things they already know. We want to shed light on some maybe lesser known links between teeth grinding and sleep. Or there's so many other things that people don't realize, I think, are a consequence of bad sleep. So what we kind of where we landed is to have this podcast a little bit structured, and we were going to talk about why sleep's important, some of the benefits, then we're going to touch on some of the common sleep issues. And because this is a podcast about habits, we're going to finish off with some great tips from you on how to improve our sleep habits. So let's start with a little discussion around sleep and why it's so important and what are the benefits that we get from getting quality sleep.
Well, I always come back to the stress recovery cycle that we apply in the sports science world, where basically every day we expose ourselves to many different stresses in our life. And then at night time, it's active recovery. And so we've got to optimize that stress recovery cycle every single day to perform at our best. So that's the principle I applied to sleep, and it works. So what I mean by that, for example, is that at night time, we've got to make sure that we're in a nice environment where we can, sleep properly without any, excessive stresses. And those stresses can be anything like noise. It can be, light, especially blue light. Anything that actually interrupts our sleep is no good. So when you apply that principle, to sleep, you can perhaps start to think about things yourself in your own environment that might be really, impairing your ability to sleep and recover properly.
It's so interesting, and of course, habits and environment are so interlinked, as we know. So, to me, sleep is very much a keystone habit. It's the thing that you need to do for everything else to kind of work. But there's so many other benefits. I mean, you talk about performance and recovery. The one that got me was anti-aging. Can we talk about that a little more?
Yes. Well, look, I always say to people, that people have, for example, with really bad sleep apnea is a classic example. And quite often these people tell me once they feel better, and the most common treatment is using a CPAP machine, where they sleep with a little mask on their face and connect to a little machine that just pumps air in and keeps their throat open. So it's like a positive air pressure stent for their throat to keep their throat open. And when people with really severe sleep apnea first start using a CPAP machine, they get the most benefits, or they feel the most benefits in that first week or two. And then I ask them, well, what difference did it make? And the most striking difference over the years is when people tell me, oh, I just feel 10 years younger.
Fantastic.
So it's really just an anecdotal sort of, it's the most common comment that I hear from people.
Wow. Just having that additional energy and vitality, it can't be underestimated. There's so many great benefits. The other ones I know I've read about is just obviously your ability to concentrate, your mood, it affects your mental health. You talk about recovery performance. What about like weight gain? There's
that's a big one. Look, the weight is a big one, and because I see it all the time, especially with people with severe sleep apnea. And the reason is because of the stress of the sleep apnea literally forces sugar into fat cells at night while they're sleeping.
Wow. So
quite often people who are overweight, they can't help it. And they know that.
Goodness.
And no one believes them.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, over the years, they've obviously, eaten more calories than they're consuming. Of course, we all know that rule.
Yeah.
But in terms of how they
factor.
feel from day to day, and in terms of their maintenance of it, they can't help it. Because quite often being overweight also makes sleep apnea even worse.
Yeah.
So that creates even more stress at night time.
It's a vicious cycle.
So that's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So we try and break that cycle for these people.
So let's talk about that. So explain, someone from your team comes to the patient's house, hooks them up, they go to sleep, and then what happens?
Yeah. Well, we analyse that data and we measure how many times they stop breathing.
Wow.
And we often see 400 or 500. Like,
Goodness.
I had a guy this morning just before coming here. He stopped breathing 749 times last night.
So how are you getting quality sleep if that's happening?
He can't.
Yeah.
And the poor guy's, overweight, struggling. He's doing his best, 2 young kids, working 2 jobs. He needs all the help he can get. So he's really looking forward to having a really good night's sleep tonight.
Yeah. Oh,
And
wonderful.
I can't wait to hear how he's feeling tomorrow, actually.
Oh, wonderful. So let's talk about some of the common, sleep challenges that you come across in your line of work.
Well, look, the number one is clearly sleep apnea, and it's underestimated and underdiagnosed. And the reason I say that is because from the research, like there's a study done in Switzerland in 2015 called the Hypno-Louse study. I always refer back to that one because it's the best study I've seen on sleep. And basically they found that 80% of people have some form of sleep apnea.
Gee.
Like most of us have a bit of sleep apnea.
Who would have thought that?
So when people ask me, why have I got it? Well, I just say, blame God. It's just because you're a human being.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's about, the question is, you need to ask yourself is, well, how bad is it? And what effect is it having on my life?
Right.
So you need to be able to ask those questions to yourself in a real honest way.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in terms of measuring it, because we know that half of all men and a quarter of all women have moderate to severe sleep apnea that actually needs treating.
Gee. Okay.
So
the main one is the sleep apnea, and of course that would have a whole lot of other issues linked to it. So we jotted down a couple of other areas that we wanted to discuss. So I guess if we start off with common sleep issues that people may have is falling asleep, and then once they're asleep, staying asleep.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the sleep onset insomnia and maintenance insomnia. So they're the two things, and that's the second most common sleep problem is just insomnia in general. And when people think about sleep problems, most people think about insomnia, but it's actually not really the most common sleep disorder that we focus on.
Okay.
Because quite often the insomnia is caused by the sleep apnea.
Right. So it's knowing which issue to address to fix the others.
Because the problem is that people with insomnia, especially sleep onset insomnia, well, even sleep maintenance insomnia where they wake up during the night, they're waking up during the night because they're choking on themselves.
Wow.
And most people don't even realise it. I mean, sure, some people are aware of it, but most people are not. And even if people are not even snoring, it can still be severe sleep apnea. And it might not be full-on apneas where your throat blocks completely. It might be just very subtle closing of the throat, just enough to increase your carbon dioxide levels in your blood that your brain detects. And especially if you're sort of a very healthy person otherwise, your body has a very strong, homeostatic sort of need just to maintain your body in that homeostasis and to keep your carbon dioxide levels in a very tight, healthy range.
Yeah.
And as soon as they rise above, 40 millimeters of mercury in your blood, your brain detects that and wakes you up.
Wow.
So and that can happen very frequently for a lot of people, and that can cause people, to wake up during the night and feel a bit stressed, and that then can be the major cause of them, not being able to go back to sleep easily, because it takes an hour or two for all the stress hormones to go away.
Yeah.
So you have to actually get out of bed, watch TV, distract yourself, and just literally wait for that next wave of tiredness.
Yeah. Wow. So that partial obstruction, is that what causes snoring? So, because by the way, for the record, I don't snore, so I wouldn't know, just... So what causes that? Yeah,
look, it's literally just a partial obstruction of the throat. It's very simple.
And it's very, I really feel for people's partners having to, because then they don't get a good night's sleep either.
Yeah, look, there's nothing good about snoring, Sheree.
No.
Nothing at all.
It's not attractive.
No, it's not attractive, and it's most likely destroying the quality of your sleep and meaning that you're not feeling as good in the morning as you perhaps potentially could be.
Yeah, of course. So let's talk about some of the other issues. So maybe, grinding and clenching, and I'm assuming that's also related to. Yeah,
look, that's a classic, because when people think about teeth grinding and clenching, they think that they're doing it in their sleep. The reality is that they're actually waking up first
Oh,
and then grinding as a frustration response second while they're awake.
goodness.
So it's not something that's happening in their sleep. No.
Wow.
No. So something is waking them first. So the question is, what is that? And for most people, it is the physical obstruction in the throat, a bit of sleep apnea.
Okay.
And usually it's the mild to moderate sleep apnea. And it's usually in healthy people, and especially, females who are also very sensitive and very healthy and very health conscious and very anxious about being as health conscious as possible.
Yeah.
So they're very sensitive to those small obstructions. And so then the teeth grinding, I call it like a frustration response because you're waking up because you're not getting enough air. So the quickest way to open up your throat and breathe better is just to clench and grind and tighten up all your muscles in your jaw and your throat just to get more air
Just
in
to
as
get
quick
more
as
air.
possible.
Goodness.
And then most of these people go back to sleep within about, say, 10 to 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's too short to remember the next day.
Right.
And that's why we don't remember it.
They just wake up with a sore jaw
They
and you
just
don't
wake
know
up
why.
with a sore jaw and a headache in the morning. So to remember waking up the next day, we have to be awake for at least 5 minutes.
That's a long time.
And
Yeah.
that's the biggest single sort of thing that still amazes me to this day about the difference between our perception of sleep and the actual reality of our sleep when we measure it, when we measure our brain waves and our eye movements and our muscle activity.
Which is why you have to have the data behind it, because you can't ask someone anecdotally, how did you sleep? How often did you wake up? What time did you fall asleep? No one's going to be able to answer. Fascinating. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was we spoke about circadian rhythms, and that's a whole other podcast. That's an entire episode. And this notion of either being a night owl or can you adjust that, or you're just born like that?
Yeah, Shireen, look, very good question. And it's a bit of the, what is it, nature versus nurture sort of thing. Look, I firmly believe with this sort of morning, lark, night owl sort of problem that it is just something that anyone can change, and that it's all due to your habits on a 24-hour cycle.
Right.
All these habits that are just reinforcing whether you're a morning person or a night person.
All right.
But you can change those habits to adjust that. So, because about a third of people are sort of, morning larks, a third of people are night owls, and the other third, have a healthy balance between the two. And it's just my personal opinion that we all should aim to have a healthy balance between the two. And that we all can by changing our daily habits.
Fascinating. So we'll touch on that in the habits section at the end. On that note, teenagers. So there's so much. I feel like there's so much research out there on children and infants and toddlers and getting their sleep cycles in place. But why are teenagers sleeping until midday on the weekends and just waking up grumpy and help me?
Well, you've got a couple of teenagers, I believe. Is that right? Yeah, Shireen. Yeah. So look, it's a major problem all around the world. And look, the biggest issue with teenagers is that they're learning so much. So they're absorbing so much new information, and the stimulation from that is what's pushing them towards being like a night owl.
A night owl.
So it's all that stimulation from all this learning, as well as all the physical growth that's going on in their body and all the hormone changes that are happening all at the same time. So they're overstimulated. So when you come back to the stress recovery cycle that I was talking about at the start that we use in the sports science world, you can start to understand that teenagers are under so much stress, that it's just turning them all into night owls.
Yeah.
And so one strategy, of course, is to try and minimise the amount of stress that they're exposed to during the day.
Yeah.
And especially trying to expose them to, or trying to compartmentalise the stress that they're exposed to as early in the day as possible.
Yeah.
That is the key. And it all starts with what time they get up and how much bright light that their eyes are exposed to first thing in the morning. because about 20 minutes of bright light first thing in the morning is the most important stress of the day to reset the circadian rhythm.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about tips and strategies and recommendations for improving the quality of your sleep. And I listened to your one of the radio interviews that you sent me, and I loved how you spoke about it's not about the 8 hours of sleep, it's about the quality. So let's talk a little bit about how we get better quality sleep.
Yeah. Well, the quality. The first one is identifying if you have any sleep apnea or not, and then fixing that. And it depends on the level or severity of the sleep apnea that you have. And to do that, you really need to do a sleep study. It doesn't. You can have them in hospitals. You can have them done at home now. There's lots of different ways and lots of different technologies to have it done. But you need the sort of technologies where they're actually measuring your brain waves and your eye movements and your muscle activity. That's the only real way of knowing what the quality of your sleep is like.
So you also spoke about waking at the same time every morning, regardless of
regardless
if you
of,
had a big night.
of if it's a weekday or a weekend or if you've had a late night. Absolutely. It is the single most important rule about sleep. So, and it doesn't matter how late you go to bed or how bad a night's sleep you have. It's so important to get up. Like, for example, with me, I tend to go to bed between 11 and 12 at night and get up at 7 a.m. every morning. And I naturally do that. Yeah. And I feel my best when I do that. Occasionally, of course, I will sleep in for an hour or so. But when I do that, I just feel terrible, and it gives me a slight headache because it's changed all the hormone levels in my body. So if you want to feel your best, it's so important because it just resets, especially all the 24-hour hormones in your body. Like the cortisol that gets a little bit released in the morning when you first wake up. That stress hormone just to get you out of bed and deal with the stresses of the day. And then the melatonin, which is released at nighttime in the absence of light, to help you actually go to sleep and stay asleep.
Yeah. Okay, what about your actual sleep environment? What are some tips or habits?
Look, the number one thing is to sleep as cool as possible. I see this problem all the time where people have got these big, expensive, winter, duck down doonas, especially in Melbourne here, and then they wonder why they're not sleeping properly. And I always remember many years ago, I was working in a betting shop actually, and I had an Essendon footballer come in, and a very famous one, and he had this sleeping problem that he was telling me about. And it was because his wife had spent all this money on all these expensive, doonas and things, and he was so hot. He was so hot, the poor guy. So it was very simple. It's like you just need to sleep as cool as possible. And the reason is because when our body temperature starts to drop, that is the strongest trigger for going to sleep.
Okay.
So think about what happens when you have a warm bath or something.
Yes.
It warms up your core temperature, and then it's the process of actually cooling down
that puts you to sleep.
Which puts you to sleep. And then during the night, our core temperature needs to drop by between half a degree and 1 degree Celsius to stay in REM sleep.
Gee.
And if our core temperature has not dropped, if we're too hot,
we don't get into that.
We will, we might try and have a bit of REM sleep, but we wake up out of it really quickly.
Yeah.
And we're just lying there awake, and we wonder why. So that's a common one.
Yeah.
Is the temp. So 15 to 18 degrees is sort of the ideal sort of ambient temperature in the room, but we can't always control that. So you can get refrigerated mattress toppers that are water filled, for example, where you can set the temperature of your bed, and they're very useful as well and far more efficient than air conditioning.
Right.
I use one of those, for example.
Yeah, of course you do.
They're brilliant.
Yeah, lovely. So if we talk a little bit now about habits for good sleep. So we touched on a few things. So what would be your top tips to get quality sleep and build some good sleep habits?
Yes, I've written a few down here just to stay focused here.
Yeah.
So look, the number one is the regularity, going to bed and getting up at the same time.
Yeah.
And you've also got to ask yourself is, what habits do I have each day, like to wake me up in the morning? What healthy stresses can I expose myself to during the day to wake me up in the morning? And then what things am I doing at night time to help me sort of, get in, to get ready for sleep? So you've got to think about all those habits. So it's, for example, with exercise in the morning is the ideal time to do it, especially in bright light. If you can get a bit of sunlight at the same time, and then having a coffee or some sort of stimulant if you really want to, a few hours after waking up. Sort of late morning is the ideal time to do that.
So happy to hear you say that. I can do that.
Yes, so that's really important. So you've got to look at things to actually what's going to stimulate me during the day. So, and we've all got things to work on. We've all got problems to solve. We've all got, life issues to work through. So give yourself time during the day to work through all those, especially those hard emotional things that you might be avoiding.
Yeah, and try and do them early in the day.
Do them allow time during the day. And if you have to go and see a counsellor to talk through those things, sure, do that. But I would encourage you to take time out during the day to even journal and write all those thoughts down, because the last thing you want to be doing is to be lying in bed at night worrying about all these things because you haven't had a chance to think about them during the day because you've been so busy. So it's getting up at that same time 7 days a week, no matter what time you go to bed, sleeping as cool as possible, looking at your environment to make sure that there's no stresses or no things interrupting your sleep, and that includes pets. You want to try and keep pets out of your bed. It's really it's not ideal.
Yeah.
As an example, it's a common one.
Damn.
So you've got to look at what habits can you create to reinforce your 24-hour circadian rhythm, and that should be the focus of your sort of habit creation.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And I love that, the work that Home Sleep does, and we've spoken about how important it is to have a sleep strategy tailored to the individual. It's not a one-fits-all, and I feel very strongly in the area of habits that you can't just download the 7-step program to break a bad habit because there's so many other factors. It has to be holistic, and I think arming people with the right information and knowledge about how and why and what empowers them to also self-coach and self-diagnose and come up with what strategy is going to work for them in the space of habits. But with what you're doing, you've got the science and the data and the numbers behind what's happening with that individual sleep to enable you to tailor that program specifically to them, which is great.
And on that issue as well, it's about identifying, okay, what's the most important problem that you need solved right now? And for some people, it might be that they're just over-anxious and overthinking sleep and trying too hard.
Yeah, just the act of going to sleep at night in itself is anxious. If you know that you struggle to sleep, just that coming to bedtime at night, it might heighten your anxiety around that. So, we want to calm that down. So, very interesting. And I could talk to you for hours. This has been really, really fascinating. And I hope that it's really given people a little bit of food for thought and perhaps highlighted some things that they weren't aware were linked or impacted by their sleep, and that if those are issues that they get onto you and Home Sleep and get that Home Sleep study done. I think I'm going to get one done for myself. Thanks for coming in, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Shireen.